President Obama stepping up his push for green energy despite the controversy that has surrounded Solyndra and a few other companies over the course of last year. That, of course, Solyndra is the solar company that went belly up after they received more than $530 million in federal aid. And now the White House is calling for even more of this renewable energy funding to more companies as part of the president's 2013 budget requests. $27.2 billion would be earmarked for this marked for this as part of the Department of Energy. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa is the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. So this is very much in his purview, as you well know. Congressman Issa, good to see you this morning. Welcome back.
Well, good to see you. And this is not the largest presidential earmark in history. The stimulus was, the TARP was. But very clearly, after you have a record of failure, repeated failure, after you understand that the president takes, the president is taking credit for the growth in natural gas, something that has nothing to do with his DOE department efforts. If anything, they're trying to stop it. And yet he's trying to double down on what amounts to presidential earmarks. When you look at the way this money has been thrown around for political favoritism, when you look at the reckless disregard for the laws and guidance they were supposed to have on these loans, and certainly when you look at the fact that they simply aren't very good businessmen, it's time for Congress to say no to presidential earmarks.
You know, it's interesting when you look at Solyndra and you look at the problems that they had. One of the main issues that was raised by all of that was let's make sure this never happens again, right? Let's go through the process, figure out how this money was allocated to a company that went bankrupt, even though, you know, there was a lot of looking into it. And it was a company, as I remember, that the Bush administration decided not to back. And then that was reversed in the beginning of the Obama administration. So what kind of assurances can the American people have that as this money goes forward, it won't be wasted again?
Well, the first thing is the money's not going forward. This proposal needs to be dead on arrival in the House. We stopped congressional earmarks years ago, and for the good reason. You shouldn't have a member of Congress slipping in something for his district. The president gets this pot of money, and then he and his personal appointees, including Secretary Chu and their sub-appointees, they figure out who to give this to for political favoritism. We need to have a system in which if there's a meritorious reason to extend money to an entity or a category or whatever, it should go through the ordinary process. The president should say, I've got this requirement, Congress should vote on it. This should not be a slush fund for presidential re-elect, which is clearly what they are today and what they have to stop being. Again, we talked about congressional earmarks for years. Now let's talk about presidential earmarks. Let's talk about the walking around money that this is proven to be. Maybe it wasn't intended to be, but it clearly needs to be reformed, and I don't think a penny should be invested until it is reformed.
What about Secretary Chu? I know you've made a lot of efforts to try to get answers from him about this program and about how the different companies were chosen that got money. How's that going?
Well, we have an agreement for a hearing date. In addition to that, we have an agreement for some additional discovery. Let's understand, Secretary Chu, in addition to being a political appointee, is a talented scientist, not a skilled business person. And that's part of the concern we have, is these dollars were effectively business investments that went bad. But when you look at the ideology, the politics, versus the sound business judgment, this was predictable, and it's part of the reason that we want to see the Secretary and start talking about how government reorganization can prevent this in the future.
You sound confident that that money that was set aside in the budget for these purposes is not going to be used that way. How can you be so sure?
Look, I have no intention on that money being set aside in the presidential's budget. I think there needs to be real reform. Understand, the president gave us a budget that's essentially $100 billion plus over his agreement to cut. For example, the DOD budget, he simply ignored the promises of cuts so that he can blame, quite frankly, Republicans for any of the $60 billion cuts that we're required to make. Additionally, the president's or the secretary's portion of the budget is greater than the president's estimate. In other words, he's increasing this green slush fund after it failed. Obviously, it has to be no, let's look at it from anew, and let's do zero-based accounting. In other words, where could we make good investments that the House, the Senate, and the president agree to? Right now, there's no agreement.
All right, Congressman Darrell Issa, busy man. As always, thanks for making some time for us today.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon.